Beside every kid playing with a Ninja Turtle, Ghostbuster, or Power Rangers figurine in the 1990s, there'd probably be someone right next to them with a Barbie. And outside of TV shows, movies, and merchandise, it's a brand that's had its fair share of video game adaptations. If the recent movie's any kind of indicator, it's still as popular as ever too, and because I'm a glutton for punishment and don't have much else going on, I thought I'd play through a bunch of these games and see what they're all about.
But why?
I mean, there's only so many times you can talk about chewing gum, kicking ass, and ripping and tearing, right?
Losing his mind.
I will say right up there that I'm not going to be covering every single Barbie game that ever existed. Firstly, because that's just kind of asinine, and if I did that, we'd be here for days going through everything. But secondly, because for a lot of these, they're really not all that interesting to begin with. Barbie video games in the 90s, for instance, wasn't even really that much of a scene, or even all that remarkable.
Oh no! Captain Barnacle must be nearby.
Outside of one game in particular, Barbie Fashion Designer, which came out in 1996. And if you can believe it, this thing outsold both Doom and Quake for that year. This one is worth noting though, because as a result of its popularity, a lot of these earlier Barbie titles tried to tap into that same market, being a little more than just point and click dress up games. But talking about a bunch of hair, clothing, and nail styling simulators doesn't really make for interesting content. And it wasn't until the late 90s where things really started to kick off anyway. In 1999 specifically, with Barbie's Race and Ride, developed by Runecraft, which is like a console-only version of a similar game named Barbie's Riding Club, which came out on the PC back in '98, in some ways making this a spiritual sequel. Which I guess makes this the System Shock and System Shock 2 of the Barbie gaming universe.
That was great! I love it here.
Now I don't know what little girls are into these days, and unless I have a daughter anytime soon, that's probably not going to change. But I can confirm as someone who had a little sister in the 90s that girls back then were indeed obsessed with horses. For my sister, it was like a combination of horses, glow-in-the-dark ceiling stars, and James Van Der Beek. So it makes sense, like if you're going to make a game for one of the most popular home consoles at the time, it's going to be featuring Barbie and it's going to be horse themed. They even let you choose your own outfit, the colour of your horse, and what its name's going to be.
Poppy!
What do they want from Poppy?
Well, Poppy's a little sloppy.
Then after being taught the ropes and given the reins, literally, you're off on your way, able to explore 4 different courses to find the fragments of a postcard that reveals the final 5th location at a hidden ranch.
Here's another piece for the missing postcard.
I don't give a rat's ass.
Oh.
But the main thing you instantly start to notice about Race and Ride is that it isn't even really a game, and you're not even really controlling the horse. Instead, it's just more like an interactive FMV where you instead just press the X button at specific times to jump over something blocking your path. Sometimes you might have to turn left or right to avoid obstacles, but most of it is just press X to jump, along with the square button every like 10 or so seconds to stop riding and check out something happening nearby.
It looks like some sort of game. Let's take a closer look.
50% of the time, this is just Barbie taking a break from her busy schedule to terrorize the local wildlife, hopping off her saddle and dropping cake to scare those innocent creatures away. I'm not even kidding too, like these animals will just be chilling out on the side of the path, you know, minding their own business, before Big Mouth Barbie shows up and just scares them off.
Oh, how cute!
Then the remaining 50% of the stops is for the abundance of minigames you need to complete, none of which you can really afford to skip either because they often contain a fragment of that postcard which reveals the location for the hidden ranch.
Hey, that's right!
Yeah, that hidden ranch, which appears to be in the middle of an extremely open and flat parcel of land. You know, which is kind of like the opposite of what hidden means. There's not even really any kind of consistency to these minigames either. I mean, you're doing things like collecting acorns through to catching fireflies in a jar. A lot of them are just outright trial and error as well, like trying to find the correct combination of burrows to get this rabbit to the front of the screen, which is just all about interacting with all these random holes. Yeah, story of my life.
That was so much fun!
Choose the wrong hole though, and this little asshole goes back to the top of the screen. There's a match 3 minigame as well, and as a colorblind person, I've got to say, man, I always hate seeing these in video games, because I know the only way to beat them is to get someone to help me. And I just don't think I can fully explain to you just how awkward and embarrassing it is for a 38-year-old man to ask his wife to come in the room just to help him beat a Barbie game.
Great! Look at all the flowers!
Just look at the flowers.
The funniest one is where you have to race Teresa, having to jump over random hazards like every 2 seconds, which is more or less this game's version of the turbo tunnels from Battletoads. Not to brag either, but yeah, I finished pretty much all of these on my first attempt. But even if I was an 11-year-old girl, like, I don't think this stuff would really fry my brain either. And as a reviewer at the time seemed to point out, it is easy to the point that it's just kind of insulting.
That was so much fun.
Once you've beat all 4 courses and unlocked the ranch, there's one final obstacle course to complete. Before the whole thing comes to an end, as Barbie approaches a barn and a small foal comes out to get fed. So, yeah, congrats. All up, the whole thing took me a bit over an hour to beat, and I wouldn't say that this is the worst game to come out on the PS1 in 1999, but sure as shit would have come close. But look, man, if you had a daughter who just had to play something on the PlayStation that year and she was probably a bit too young for Silent Hill, well, could have been worse.
Great race, Teresa.
Runecraft followed Race and Rider with Super Sports that same year, with both games releasing a month apart. However, where Race and Ride was a poor excuse at a horse riding sim, Barbie Super Sports is more akin to an actual game, offering up 2 modes here, either inline skating or snowboarding. Kind of making it like a combination, I guess, of Tony Hawk and the Cool Boarders series.
Yeah, that was so cool.
Regardless of which mode you go with though, they both start off the same. You hit the store with some pocket change and choose Barbie's outfit, followed by the skates or snowboard she's going to use.
This board rocks.
Then after that, you're dropped into a sort of hub area and can choose from 1 of 3 courses to beat. For the inline skating one, you're really just moving around all of these flat areas, collecting tickets and other items to increase your score. And once the score limit for the level is reached, it just all comes to an end.
Alright.
You can also do tricks, kind of, but I can't really stress enough here just how crappy and sluggish these are to pull off. Because half the time the controls don't even register that you're trying to jump and you'll just slam into something instead. I mean, controlling Barbie here, it really does feel like you're trying to roller skate with shopping trolleys on your feet. And hearing her say words like awesome and radical really does kind of devalue the power those words seem to have. I mean, it's like hearing your mum say it or something.
Whoa, awesome. Radical.
I say radical. That's my thing that I say.
Anyway, after you've beaten each of these courses for a second time, you then unlock the 4th and final course, which is a carnival that is the absolute embodiment of visual diarrhea. And here you're required to do a stunt off every rail, jump and loop the loop before it's all over, with a low resolution cinematic being your only reward.
Yeah, we rock.
You serious?
The snowboarding side of things is more or less the same, only the courses actually have different objectives now, and you're moving in a forward direction as opposed to across the screen. For the first track, you've got to collect a bunch of purple balloons and avoid the blue ones, which subtract points for some reason. Either way though, again, as a hopelessly colorblind asshole, I can barely see the difference between each of these types.
Remember, avoid those blue balloons or you'll lose points.
Shut up!
For the second course, you're having to knock over all these snowmen placed randomly throughout the stage. And then for the third course, you've got to race head-to-head against Barbie's best bud, Teresa. Weirdly too in a split screen mode, which just kind of seems a bit odd considering you're racing against the AI and not another player.
Cool.
Then again, after you've finally beaten that 4th and final course, you get another brief pre-rendered cinematic, and then that's it, dog. You've beaten Barbie Super Sports.
So cool.
Overall, it's easily one of the shortest games in the entire video, taking me under an hour to get through. And a lot like Race and Ride, there's really no reason to ever replay it.
Really?
I know, right? No New Game Plus mode, no infinite rocket launcher to unlock, nothing. I mean, there are better skates and snowboards you can buy, but weirdly, there doesn't seem to be any way to earn extra money after you've beaten all those main courses. And even then, like, the better boards and the skates don't seem to be all that much better anyway. I think the problem is that if you compare this thing to other games in the same genres, you know, that being Tony Hawk and the Cool Boarders series, it really just does look kind of lame in comparison. And in fact too, like one of the games that me and, you know, more specifically my sister spent the most amount of time playing on our PlayStation 1 was Cool Boarders 2.
Cool Boarders!
Which has female characters to choose from and is a damn sight better as far as snowboarding sims go. So I guess my point is, if the snowboarding game that's not even targeting little girls is more fun than the one that's designed to actually appeal to that demographic, then why would you waste your time with the latter?
Cool. Double points.
But it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense!
That was so cool.
Granted, there wasn't many, if any, roller skating games for the PS1. In fact, the only ones that even come to mind are ESPN Extreme Games and X-Blades. So the point of comparison for that skating mode isn't just low, but it's borderline non-existent. I don't know, at least the snowboarding mode has a half-decent drum and bass soundtrack, which admittedly was the style at the time. But if only it had a bit of Offspring or Goldfinger, well, it might have at least been somewhat redeemable.
Radical.
Quit copying me!
Next up, we're in the year 2000 with another Runecraft banger in Detective Barbie and the Mystery Cruise.
Welcome to Detective Barbie.
And what I didn't realise until I beat this one is that it's actually the third game in a series. You got The Mystery of the Carnival Caper in 1998, and then Barbie's The Mystery of Who Clogged Up the Shitter that came out in 1999.
I don't think so.
The story is that Barbie's investigating the theft of some expensive artworks on a cruise ship, which honestly isn't as overwhelming as it sounds, considering that there's only about half a dozen people on the ship to begin with, Barbie included. And even then, the only actual suspects are the ship's captain, an actress, and the ship's entertainer. Yeah, so 3 people.
If only I had the money, I could pay someone to write new songs for me.
Guilty as charged.
Anyway, first you need to find the 3 stolen artworks, which are all hidden away on 3 nearby islands.
Here it is. We found the stolen mask.
And then scan the fingerprints on each of them to finally get a match for one of the suspects, like a regular old Sherlock Holmes. But this one is kind of unique, if only for its fixed camera perspective, which is reminiscent of a lot of older survival horror games from that same era. I mean, keep in mind that Resident Evil 3 had only come out 1 year prior. And can I just say on a side note that I would have totally played a Barbie-themed survival horror game set on a cruise ship. But compared to the Resident Evil games, this is a whole lot simpler, and you really just spend most of the time here walking from room to room, for standing in one place and talking to someone over and over.
Yeah, there's always something to be done on board ship.
Plus, they've also shoehorned in a bunch of minigames because we know how much these Barbie titles love their goddamn minigames. Like playing shuffleboard, for instance.
Yeah, good shot.
Along with these various others that you need to complete before finding each artwork, including, yes, yet again, another one that discriminates against me and my fellow color-identifying challenged brethren.
Good job, Barbie.
I mean, goddamn son, at this point, isn't it just all but confirmed that Mattel hates colorblind people?
Yeah, we rock.
There's also the single worst jet ski minigame that ever existed, where you race against Teresa, big surprise, who drives like an absolute fucking maniac. And it's no Wave Race 64, let's just put it that way. Along with this weird flying minigame where you avoid jets of air and fly through rings to gain speed, which again is a good showcase for the AI being a goddamn cheat.
Yeah, this is the best.
About the only purpose either of these serve is for the finale, because once you've figured out who the suspect is, which seems to be randomly generated, you've then got to chase after them on a jet ski, like at the end of Police Academy 3. Followed by then chasing after them in the air, like at the end of Police Academy 4. Before Barbie finally catches them on one of the nearby islands, and I can't help but find this absolutely hilarious that someone would ever run away from her to begin with. I mean, I think having an empty plastic bag caught in the wind coming after you would be more menacing. I mean, it's not like she's gonna start discombobulating the suspect as they run away, is it?
Discombobulate. Block his blind jab. Discombobulate.
Either way though, this case ain't exactly the final problem. And like the couple of games before it, the whole thing only took me about an hour to get through. I mean, there might be some value in replaying this to see all the different suspects, but the outcome seems to be the same either way, so I can't imagine why you'd bother.
Oh, now that was awesome.
Right, so once again, we're back in the hands of Runecraft with Barbie Explorer, released in 2001, which is kind of like a combination of Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider. And this was actually the only one I'd heard of before making this video, with a lot of people always going on about how hard it is, which is something you don't really expect to hear anyone say when talking about Barbie games. I will say though that first impressions are pretty good. There's a nice looking cinematic before the game loads where Barbie's escaping with some kind of artifact that probably belongs in a museum.
It belongs in a museum!
There's even a minecart chase across rickety rails in a dingy shaft. I mean, it's classic stuff, man. And then that font on the main menu is so blatant that you just can't help but get a chuckle out of it. Starting a new game, we learn that the story is that Barbie has to find 4 artifacts to unlock an ancient mirror. Yeah, a mirror? I'm surprised it wasn't just an ancient handbag. Anyway, to do this, she needs to explore 4 different areas: the African jungle, Tibet, Egypt, and then finally Babylon, with each location being comprised of 3 separate stages and then a boss encounter. And it's easy to see once you start playing how you can easily compare this one to Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider. I mean, the whole premise of just running up the screen in more or less a single direction, timing jumps over pits, and getting across moving platforms is very similar to Naughty Dog's iconic series.
What have I got?
Even just the backdrop is kinda similar too, with a lot of these levels in the jungles looking like they could be something taken right out of the first game. But then the Tomb Raider aspect comes in when you get to some of those more challenging platforming sections, which really do require these perfectly coordinated jumps. If you hold the R1 button down, Barbie walks as opposed to running, which prevents you from falling off the edge. And this becomes essential during certain areas where they really seem to have taken sadistic glee in creating these really frustrating obstacles. Obstacle really being the key word here, because let me tell you, man, this game does not fuck around. And by the second level, you're having to get past some really tough sections. Like this bit here where you gotta grapple along these vines, avoiding swooping birds, but the camera angle and the draw distance makes it really tricky. The main menu offers up this really weird VR training mode, which almost seems out of place. But you may actually want to pay attention here because you will genuinely need to know about all these mechanics. And although you start off each level with a whopping 20 lives, touching anything or falling off a ledge is going to instantly kill you, which means that over time those lives are going to drop off pretty damn quick. Power-ups don't exactly help you out either. In fact, I think the running shoes is someone's idea of a joke, pretty much turning you into Sonic the goddamn Hedgehog. Scattered throughout each level is all this abundance of gems to collect, though what these actually do, I've got no idea. Outside of, I think, just feeding to someone's need to be a completionist. Weirdly too, I found the bosses to be the easiest part of the game. The first boss, for instance, is a giant snake.
Why did it have to be snakes?
And about all you have to do here is jump over its body as you make your way towards the head to grab the first artifact.
Congratulations, you've completed the level.
But compared to what you've just had to do in the prior levels, jumping over a snake's body is like playing hopscotch in comparison.
Very dangerous.
Tibet, I definitely found to be the hardest area in the game. Now this sees Barbie donning her winter coat and matching thermal underwear and braving some harsh and icy environments to find the second artifact. And some of these areas are just brutal. Not only requiring perfect accuracy with your jumps, but also perfect timing, as you got to get across these multiple moving platforms and almost really start to think a couple of steps ahead. Or this bit here, having to jump across this very clearly Crash Bandicoot inspired wooden bridge, whilst also avoiding incoming birds that are able to push you off the edge.
Bullshit!
I mean, it's like they genuinely looked at Road to Nowhere in Crash 1 and asked, how can we make that even worse? The boss for this chapter is a Yeti who throws snowballs, which overall is a piece of piss. I mean, you might die a couple of times learning the patterns, but that's about it.
What a big coward.
Don't know if Egypt was actually easier or I'd just become better at the game, but either way, I found this area a lot easier to get through. The only real pain in my plastic ass was all of these mini tornadoes blocking my path all the time that I couldn't help notice looked like Taz from Looney Tunes.
That is absolutely cursed!
And I also thought too that a lot of these levels looked halfway decent, which is actually one thing worth praising. Because outside of the animations and the controls, which let's be honest are pretty substandard, the overall presentation isn't that bad for a PS1 game. There's a bit later on when you're inside a pyramid and you have to find the right path across this pit, which kind of feels like a flat out homage to the Word of God scene from The Last Crusade. So I really do think that some praise is earned here just for the variety between all of these chapters, especially for the bosses. Oh yeah, and speaking of, for the boss encounter for the third area, you're being chased by a very slowly moving alligator and have to make your way downriver, which is again so easy in comparison to the previous levels that it's almost baffling. Having said all that though, they saved the absolute worst for last, with the final few stages in Babylon. Now the first one has you moving upriver, jumping across lily pads and floating turtles, which, yeah, I'm sure again in no way was inspired by Crash Bandicoot. For the level after this, Barbie's going to spend most of it on her ass, which she's probably used to, moving down river on a raft, which isn't so much hard as it is just needlessly long and drawn out. Not to mention, I also had a potentially game-ending bug here during this bit where the raft physics just completely shat themselves. Eventually though, I made it to the final boss, which is like a terrifying version of Audrey 2 from the Little Shop of Horrors. And after avoiding a bunch of Venus flytraps, which, again, totally not Crash Bandicoot inspired, and slipping past Audrey 2, Barbie gets that final artifact. The ending cinematic has her going all Raiders of the Lost Ark before making her escape, only for it to then cut back to the museum as she unlocks the ancient mirror. Just in time for the game to come to an end with a cliffhanger.
Hey! This is bullshit!
Yeah, a goddamn cliffhanger with a to be continued message. I don't know, I guess someone was really banking on this being an ongoing series. Except as we now know, it wasn't, and they never made another Barbie game like this ever again. Which is a bit of a shame because the only issue I think this one has is that for something that's really targeted at little girls, it really is kind of needlessly difficult. I mean, look, that's not to say that girls aren't able to beat these kind of games, but if you put Barbie in the title or something, well, you'd expect there to be some degree of lenience when it comes to the challenge. I mean, half the time the game got so challenging that I thought I might have accidentally started playing Dark Souls and not realised. And even as a guy who's beaten every Crash Bandicoot game and spent way too much time looking at Lara's ass, I'm not ashamed to admit that this thing really put me to the test. But you want to know what sure as hell didn't help this thing either? Well, how about the fact that by the year 2001, the PlayStation was basically redundant due to the existence of the PS2. Never mind that it had already launched a year prior, but on the PS2 alone, just that year we had Silent Hill 2, GTA 3 and Metal Gear Solid 2. So for a Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider inspired clone to come out on what was quickly becoming dated hardware, well, it sure didn't help its chances.
You can count on me, Professor. As of today, I'm reporting as Barbie, world-class explorer.
Speaking of swan songs, the last game that came out for the PS1 was Barbie's Gotta Have Games in 2002, which funnily enough was actually developed by DICE Canada.
Press start to check out the games we can play in the city.
Yeah man, the same DICE Canada who worked on a couple of expansions for Battlefield. And in fact, the very next game they made after this was Battlefield Vietnam. That, however, is really about the only interesting thing that this one has going for it, and there's really not much to say here considering it's entirely comprised of a bunch of minigames you'll probably beat in a matter of minutes. Like this one, which has got to be the world's shittiest Bubble Bobble clone.
That gave us some space.
Oh, this one, which is a conga line simulator, not to mention an outright ripoff of Snake 2. And while that might not sound familiar to most people these days, to anyone like me who grew up with an old Nokia phone in the early 2000s, that right there, man, is downright nostalgic. Overall, I could see this one being a bit of a hoot at a sleepover, you know, before everyone started watching Dawson's Creek or Party of Five, but it's otherwise a bit of a depressing departure for Barbie's tenure throughout the 5th gen.
Nice one.
But what followed after this was actually quite surprising, with some decent titles coming out on the PS2, with Wild Horse Rescue, The 12 Dancing Princesses, and then Riding Camp. Yeah, 2 more horse-themed games, man, and I swear that Barbie spends more time around horses than Lara Croft.
I understood that reference.
Now, Wild Horse Rescue was developed by Blitz Games and released in 2003 for the PS2 and the Xbox, and true to its namesake, is about rescuing wild horses. In a lot of ways too, this is really just an updated version of Race and Ride. Again, taking place across 3 different looking locations, the forest, one in the snow, and then one finally on the beach, with there being 3 courses now for each area. The other difference though is that you actually get to freely control the horse instead of just pressing the jump button to avoid obstacles. And instead of just making your way to the finish line, you're also rescuing foals and other horses that have escaped from the ranch.
Don't be afraid.
It's afraid. It's afraid!
Which again means that you're having to frequently stop and hop off your horse to interact with these things, leading them back to a safe spot so they can be picked up later on. And this ranges from just simply leading them back by the reins to having to avoid life-threatening hazards like rolling logs and boulders.
Great job. We got past the logs.
Along with avoiding the incredibly hostile local wildlife like raccoons, skunks, and even turtles, which I guess is kind of educational in a way, because I had no idea that these critters were so goddamn aggressive in real life.
Gotcha, bitch!
Then each of these courses ends with Barbie having to either wrangle a horse that tries to gallop away or race off against one of her buddies.
Go!
The main issue I have with this one though is that it is just so agonizingly slow to play through. Controlling the horse is just really clunky, and if you hit so much as a twig on the ground, then the horse rears up and comes to a complete stop. Hopping on and off the horse is also painfully tedious, and Barbie's movement speed could be best described as a light jog. So running around and collecting all the abundance of coins and chests takes even longer than it really should.
Come on, while we're young.
Not to mention it's just a really boring and repetitive loop, saving the same brain-dead foals over and over. I mean, you gotta consider that there's 6 of them per course and then 3 courses per location, with 3 locations all up, so that makes it 54 of these things you've got to slowly lead to safety.
Here you go. We should get this foal to a safe point.
And I hate the fact too that I'm one of those people with OCD who just has to go around collecting every single coin and pick up in the map. I guess on a positive note, visually it doesn't look too bad though, and it does have a decent amount of variety between each of these courses. I'm not sure what engine it actually runs on, but if I could wager a guess, I'd say it's the Renderware engine, only because it does have that kind of familiar look to it. And I mean, it's not going to compete with the likes of Project Gotham Racing 2, but I mean, look man, as a kid's game, it serves its purpose. I gotta say though that I do think it was a weird creative decision to make the final unlockable area in the game be set in the ancient hidden city of Ryla, and I genuinely didn't see that Lovecraftian twist coming. It is kind of weird too how this thing got absolutely shat on by reviewers at the time. I mean, Morgan Webb, for instance, even gave this thing a 1 out of 5, calling it the worst game ever made, which is kind of insulting. I mean, yeah, it's pretty crappy, but it's not the worst game ever made. It's not even the worst game of 2003. Then again, that was the year that the critics also said Evil Dead Fistful of Boomstick was a bad game. So, yeah, that shows how much those idiots actually know. The thing is that more or less everything that Wild Horse Rescue does, Riding Camp would eventually build upon and improve. But I mean, for kids who were into horses in 2003, this wasn't your worst option.
Great job, Barbie! You won the race!
Gotcha, bitch.
12 Dancing Princesses dropped in 2006, developed by Blue Monkey Studios, as a tie-in for the film of the same name. The story for this one is you're playing as Genevieve, one of the 12 princess daughters of King Randolph, a guy who seems dead set on trying to beat Nick Cannon's record, and honestly someone who should really look at investing in some rubbers for the bedside table. Anyway, turns out King Randolph is really sick and he won't wake up, probably from having a dozen fucking kids. But luckily Genevieve opens a portal to some kind of magical land where her and the sisters all depart to find an elixir they hope's gonna cure their father's condition. That condition being a throbbing fucking erection. Alright, I'm done. A plot which, as far as I can tell, is more or less spot on to the film. And in the game's defense, along with staying faithful to the movie, it actually doesn't look too bad, showing off some really colourful and vibrant environments with the modelling for all the various characters being really detailed.
Let's keep moving. We have to save the king.
It's kind of hilarious to me as well that this thing runs on the Renderware engine, and I know that this engine's been put to work more than your mum is at a frat party. It's just kind of funny to think that the same engine that powered titles like GTA 3 and Manhunt is also being used on a Barbie game. The CGI during the cinematics though is oddly kind of detailed, and does have the detriment of some truly terrifying lip syncing.
Such a shame that Cousin Rowena has ruined this happy place for us.
Along with all the various characters having these tiny dolphin teeth and these truly nightmare-inducing gazes. Genevieve, for instance, has the cold, dead eyes of a killer, and the younger girls look like their heads are about to start spinning at any moment.
Come play with us, Daddy.
How's the gameplay though? Well, I'm so glad you asked. 12 Dancing Princesses is more or less a platformer. Though having said that, Genevieve's jump height is absolutely pathetic, and I've seen legless, arthritic elderly people get off the ground better than she can. Isn't really going to matter either way though, because if you ever fall off a ledge or, God forbid, into any pools of ankle-high water, you instantly just respawn back on the nearest ledge.
Oops, we jumped too early.
Throughout the game world are all these sisters, with there being 3 in each area, and it becomes this familiar loop of going into an area, finding 3 keys to unlock gates, behind which you'll find one of the siblings. Throughout the levels, there's also an abundance of gems lying around, but again, like Barbie Explorer, the purpose of these, I've got no idea.
Let's keep searching.
And honestly, it seems like they only exist to prey on my anxiety, because almost constantly you're having to watch out for monkeys that slide down on vines to steal them, often from right in front of you.
All right, a spinning emblem.
The fact you can hear these things chittering about almost constantly always had me on edge, and you just know that some asshole level designer had a good laugh here, working these things into the gameplay. Anyway, once you find one of the princesses, you've then got to beat an easily beatable minigame, and a lot of these minigames are frequently reused as well, like this one here where you have to create some kind of sequence for a light show.
You're doing a great job.
Or this one where you've got to time D-pad inputs to the music like you're playing Dance Dance Revolution. Another one is literally just columns, so yeah, another match 3 color-based sequence. And you know what, at this point I'm so over this colorblind stuff that I'm not even gonna say it, even though I just did.
Alright.
And then after you've beaten each of these, you have to choreograph a dance routine for each princess, because only through the power of love and badly choreographed dancing can they save their father, or I don't know, something like that. Who gives a shit?
You're going to make a wonderful dance show.
And this plays out the same way each time. You choose a bunch of preset dance moves and then just have to wait the whole thing out while the princess performs it in front of you. All 12 times.
Alright, great show.
Shut up!
And you know what this reminds me of? It's like when someone else's kid comes up to you at like a party, all excited, wanting to show you something really lame that they've just learned. So you just kind of have to sit there smiling at them so you don't hurt their feelings. That's what this feels like.
You look so happy while you're dancing, Isla.
I will give this thing credit in one way though, in that it is a game, like an actual game with a start and an end. And more than that though, as a movie tie-in, it seems to be pretty faithful. I mean, look, I'm not about to go off and watch the movie itself. I'd rather use my asshole as an ashtray, but it does seem to capture the general plot and aesthetic of the film. So for kids who enjoyed the movie and wanted to reenact that same plot themselves, well, you've got to give them props. Just a bit of a shame that that plot had to involve watching 20 minutes of people dancing.
Thank you, Genevieve. Dancing is so much fun.
This brings us on to the final game in the Horse Adventure series, with Barbie Riding Camp released in 2008 and developed by Pixel Tales.
Welcome to Barbie Horse Adventures.
And there's actually 2 versions for this one on the PS2 and then another one for the Nintendo Wii. But having played both and outside of Digital Foundry doing a 90-minute long expose over which one is truly the best, something which I would totally watch by the way, the PlayStation 2 version is the one that I went with.
Yes, I think this works perfectly.
Right, so the story this time is that Barbie's come to this island in the middle of nowhere to learn how to ride horses. Only the island's just been hit by a severe storm, so to work her way through the ranks and graduate from riding camp, Barbie has to complete challenges and missions to help out all these folks who live on the island.
Are you ready to get started?
And what instantly stuck out to me about this one is the map design, because riding camp is more or less an open world sandbox that you're free to explore. In fact, as soon as you get your first horse and pass that agonizingly slow tutorial, you can check out the island at your own pace. Controlling the horse is a bit clunky at first. You move your horse to speed up with the R1 button and then slow it down or stop it with L1, but it quickly becomes second nature, and the controls are responsive and mostly smooth. You can choose different outfits for Barbie to wear, along with changing your horse's saddle, but more than that, groom it and keep it energized with food and water, proving that you can indeed lead a horse to water and make it drink.
There you are. Nice clean water.
There's even collectible items to be found in the environment and a whole night and day cycle going on as well, so it's definitely kind of odd to be playing an open world game like this in the Barbie universe of all things. In fact, I've got to be honest, half the time I forgot what game it was and thought I'd accidentally put in Red Dead Redemption 2 by mistake. Running around the game world also kind of reminds me of playing Elder Scrolls Oblivion if it was on the lowest graphical setting, and also a lot like those country missions in GTA San Andreas before you got to San Fierro. And again, probably not the worst comparison considering this is yet another Barbie game that uses the Renderware engine.
That's one bunch of carrots.
The ultimate end goal here is to get 5 ribbons in total, unlocking better horses along the way by completing a series of more challenging courses, starting with just riding in a circle before eventually going full on cross country, avoiding fallen trees and jumping over barricades. The horses all have different stats for things like stamina, speed and agility, not that it really matters, because most of these challenges are more or less unfailable. Side missions then fill out the rest of the content, like helping some poor kid find his lost boat.
My boat! My boat!
Collecting seashells by the seashore. Or helping some old lady find her cat that's gotten stuck up a tree, which I have to say is pretty realistic. Because, you know, cats are dumb and do dumb shit, like get stuck up trees.
Oh, Gordon, come here, you
little one.
I really appreciate though one of the developers being smart enough to make it so you can interact with NPCs without having to get off your horse. And that might not sound like much of a big deal, but consider the alternative, which would be having to dismount and mount again every 30 seconds. If you ever get lost or just want to quickly get back to the main stable, you can even fast travel and be there in an instant, which is again another pretty solid quality of life inclusion.
What a beautiful new morning.
And because it's a kids game, if you ever fall off a cliff, either accidentally or on purpose, you'll be instantly teleported back to stable ground, none the worse for wear.
Close call.
It just shows that some sense of thought and consideration for actual gameplay mechanics was included here. The only thing this one had going against it is that it came out in 2008. And look, I don't know how up to date you are with your console launch dates, but let me refresh your memory and remind you that the PS3 came out in late 2006, which is yet again another problem a lot of these titles had, you know, just being 1 or 2 years later than they really should have been. Either way though, this is easily one of the best Barbie games ever made, and a good 3 or 4 hours long too, providing really a lot of good value.
Okay, your hopes are all good now.
And if you put a gun to my head or a Venus flytrap to my nutsack and told me to play through it from start to finish, well, could be worse. I mean, you could have asked me to play through Red Dead 2 again. Now, the final thing I'm going to be talking about is some of the titles that got released on the Nintendo Wii, which isn't going to be super long, if only for the simple reason that a lot of them really aren't that fascinating. Like Barbie's Groom and Glam Pups, released in 2010, which isn't even really a Barbie game, it's more of like a glorified Tamagotchi. This is one where you adopt a dog and then dress it up, train it to do tricks and groom it before sending it off to earn cash like a little whore. Fuck. You can unlock new breeds and more outfits, but it's really just the same 3 modes repeated over and over. And I can't imagine how anyone would want to play this for more than like 30 minutes.
Awesome.
Barbie's Jet Set and Style from 2011 is more of the same, only this time you're a stylist, cutting human hair instead of dog hair, all whilst jet setting to the kind of cities that sound glamorous on paper, but in actuality are total shitholes, like Paris for instance. Yeah, I went there in 2012, it sucked. The whole place smelled like cigarettes and unwashed hair.
That's so Vogue.
I'd say that it feels like it could have been an expansion pack for The Sims 3, but honestly, that's an insult to The Sims 3 expansion packs.
How pretty.
The only real proper game that Nintendo Wii had was Barbie and the Three Musketeers, based on the critically acclaimed film of the same name, which was in turn based off the famous 19th century novel, which in turn was also based off the Charlie Sheen film Hot Shots 2.
Now I will kill you until you die from it.
But this one is even more interesting because it was developed by Way Forward Technologies, who worked on the Shanty series and the recent River City Girls, both known for their female-centric characters, 2D gameplay and colourful art style. And you'd hardly know this even came from the same developers if all you saw was that misleading box art, which only shows off these pre-rendered 3D images, when in actuality, this is a 2D platformer, and to be honest, a pretty damn good one. And I know that it might be more entertaining for me to say that I'd rather eat the rotten asshole of a roadkill skunk and down it with beer than play this, but that's really not the case here. And this might be the best Barbie game I've played. Yeah, there's a sentence I bet you never thought you'd hear me say.
I see.
The story loosely follows the same plot as the movie. You're playing as Corinne heading to Paris to follow in the footsteps of her old man and become a musketeer, with the aid of her cat Miette along the way. A cat which is seriously getting close to having its furry ass sued. But right off the bat though, that's already what makes this one so unique, because aside from moving around the levels as Corinne, at any time you can whip that pussy out and explore all the tiny nooks and crannies. That sounded way worse than I meant it to. Along the way, you'll also meet up with other musketeer hopefuls who all have their own unique skill sets. So for starters, Corinne has the ability to somehow grab onto ceilings with her bare hands and shuffle across like she's on monkey bars. But then the first one to actually join the group is Vivica, who can use ribbons to swing across hooks sticking out of the walls. The second one is Renee, who has a crossbow, which is handy for hitting enemies and hard to reach switches. And then thirdly and finally is Aramina, a dancer who can jump higher than the others. And you can swap between all 4 of these on the fly whenever they're needed.
I wonder what's over there.
Kind of reminds me of that old game on the Super Nintendo, The Lost Vikings, and visually the art style kind of gives me flashbacks to playing Monolith Productions' Claw, which is another really underrated 2D platformer.
Hey!
There's even areas in the early levels you can't access until you've met all the characters, making this one of the few, if not the only Barbie game that has a replayability factor. Going back into those earlier levels to reach every possible area, to find all the hidden coins to then spend on new outfits for the girls, hats for the cat, that rhymes, and bonus artwork.
Thank you for your purchase.
And speaking of artwork, the art style for this game is really well done too. You've got all these hand-drawn sprites which are really well animated, you've got parallax scrolling for the backgrounds in each area, giving the levels some sense of depth, and each location is visually varied. Plus, it's an actual game as well, and one that doesn't treat the player's intended audience like complete idiots. Boss fights at the end of each chapter even have multiple phases and attack patterns. I mean, it is still kind of impossible to be killed because you take more hits than Andre the Giant, but some of the platforming stuff can be tricky, requiring decent reflexes and timing. The only thing that sucks here are the controls, which to be honest is more the fault of the Wiimote itself rather than the actual controls in game, mostly due to how clunky that Nintendo controller is. I mean, it really does feel like you're trying to play this thing with a TV remote, and not a good TV remote either. I'm talking one of those really thick, dumb ones from the 1990s. Overall though, I ain't got nothing against Barbie and the Three Musketeers.
Musketeers? More like Muscatastrophe.
Way Forward understood the assignment here and made a game that caters to its key audience perfectly. It sure is juxtaposed when compared to other Wii titles like Mad World. But if this was the game you unwrapped on your birthday or Christmas morning, goddamn son, it could have been worse.
Thank you for your purchase.
And having said all that, I think it's probably best here to leave things on a high note.
I can't believe we're finally here.
I realise I'm leaving out a lot of other games I probably could have talked about, but truthfully, after these few games on the Wii, and what's an absurdly expensive title for the PS3 and the Xbox 360, there's not really that much else to cover. It just seemed from that point on, Barbie games were limited to Android and iOS, and also kind of regressed a bit, going back to the more fashion-focused themes from the 1990s. It is interesting though to see how these games went from being simplistic, basic point-and-click experiences in the 90s, through to having much more creative concepts and actual gameplay in the mid to late 2000s, to then again just dumbing things down again in recent years. Either way though, it's been an interesting time, man, going back and taking a look at a series which never quite found its footing in a particular theme or genre. And I still stand by what I said earlier, and that's that if anyone wants to take a stab at making a Barbie-themed survival horror game, I'll be the first one to play it.